Welcome back to Olympus Dreams, where ancient stories unfold like petals in moonlight. Tonight, we follow the thread of creation's most curious gift and the woman whose name still echoes through time. Settle deeply now and let the story begin. Long before the box was opened, before its lid was ever lifted, there existed only the silence of an unfinished world. The gods walked among clouds that tasted of honey and light, and mortals below moved through their days like shadows cast by a distant flame. Between these two realms, between divine certainty and human unknowing, something was about to change. Something was being made. In the workshops of Olympus, where marble met starlight and the air shimmered with purpose, Hephaestus bent over his work. His hands, scarred and steady, moved across cool clay with the patience of one who had shaped countless forms before. But this form was different. This one would breathe. This one would walk among mortals and carry within her a gift no human had yet received. The god of forge and fire did not hurry. He smoothed the clay with fingertips that remembered the heat of creation itself, building bone and sinew from earth and intention. Around him, the workshop hummed with quiet industry. Tools of bronze and gold hung from walls that had witnessed the birth of countless wonders. The bellows wheezed softly, breathing life into coals that glowed like captured sunset. Hephaestus worked in near silence, speaking only to the clay, whispering words that no mortal tongue could shape. The form beneath his hands began to take shape slowly, inevitably, like dawn arriving over distant mountains. She would be called Pandora, all-gifted. Though she did not know it yet, could not know it, for she was still clay and promise, still potential waiting to unfold. Zeus had commanded this making. The king of gods, whose will moved like thunder across the face of the world, had spoken his desire into being. He wanted something beautiful. He wanted something new. He wanted a creature who would carry his gift down to the realm of mortals, who would walk among them bearing the weight of divine intention. But Zeus, as always, had not explained everything. Gods rarely do. The reasons stretched back through time to a theft, to a titan's defiance, to fire stolen and given freely to those who shivered in darkness. Prometheus had done this thing. Prometheus, the foresighted one, had looked upon humanity struggling in cold and shadow and felt something the gods called foolishness, but might have been compassion. He had climbed to the realm of heaven and stolen flame from the chariot of the sun, carrying it down to earth in a hollow fennel stalk. The mortals had received it with trembling hands, and their world had transformed. Zeus had not forgotten. Zeus never forgot. So the woman was being made. So Hephaestus shaped her from clay and purpose, from earth that had never known footsteps, from intention that had never known mercy. Her face emerged first, high cheekbones and a brow smooth as river stones. Eyes that would open on wonder and close on sorrow. Lips that would speak words not yet written, that would taste bread and honey and the salt of tears not yet shed. The workshop grew warmer as the work continued. Or perhaps time itself grew heavy, bending under the weight of what was being created. Hephaestus stepped back at intervals, studying his work from different angles, adjusting a curve here, smoothing a line there. He was a perfectionist, even when perfection carried a hidden edge. Especially then. Outside, the sun completed its arc across the sky, and evening settled over Olympus like a sigh. The first stars appeared, hesitant and bright, pinpricks of light against the deepening blue. Inside the workshop, Hephaestus continued. He shaped her hands with particular care, forming fingers that would one day reach for something they should not touch. He shaped her feet, which would carry her toward a fate already written in the minds of gods. When the form was complete, he stood back and waited. The clay figure lay upon a table of polished wood, surrounded by tools and the faint smell of iron and earth. She was beautiful in the way that all unfinished things are beautiful, holding within them the promise of what they might become. But she did not yet breathe. She did not yet wake. That would come later, when the other gods arrived to offer their gifts. Athena would give her skill in weaving, her fingers learning the dance of thread and loom. Aphrodite would grant her grace, the kind that made mortals stop and stare, forgetting their own names. Hermes would teach her cunning, words that could persuade and charm and deceive when necessary. Each god would approach with a gift, and each gift would add another layer to what she was becoming. But that was still ahead, still waiting in the unfolding of time. For now, in this quiet moment, she was only clay and potential. Only earth shaped by divine hands, waiting for the breath that would make her real. Hephaestus looked down at his creation and felt something stir in his chest. Pride, perhaps, or concern, or the strange weight that comes from knowing you have made something that cannot be unmade, that will walk out into the world and change it in ways even gods cannot fully predict. He reached out and touched her forehead once, gently, leaving no mark but carrying a blessing nonetheless. The coals in the forge dimmed slowly, their light fading to ember glow. Shadows lengthened across the workshop floor, stretching toward corners where starlight could not quite reach. Tomorrow the other gods would come. Tomorrow she would wake and learn her name and begin the journey that had already been prepared for her. But tonight she rested in the space between being and becoming, held in the careful hands of silence. And somewhere far below, in the world of mortals who did not yet know her name, the evening fires burned bright with stolen flame. The night deepened around the workshop. Stars multiplied across the vault of sky, crowding against one another as if drawn by curiosity. Hephaestus moved through the familiar space with the careful gait of one whose body had learned long ago to compensate for its imperfections. His limp was less pronounced here, among his tools and creations, where no one watched and nothing judged. He gathered materials from various corners of the room. A boat of linen woven so finely it seemed to hold light within its threads. A circlet of silver that had cooled in moonwater. A pair of sandals crafted from leather so soft they would make no sound upon marble or earth. These things would clothe her when she woke, when breath entered her lungs and her eyes opened to see Olympus for the first time. The clay form remained motionless on its table. Patient, waiting. Hephaestus laid the garments beside her with surprising gentleness. His hands, scarred from countless hours at the forge, calloused from hammer and tongs, moved with the delicacy of a weaver working at a loom. He had made armor that could turn aside spears. He had forged thunderbolts that split mountains. But this required something different, a lighter touch, an awareness of fragility. He stepped to the far wall where shelves held vessels of various sizes. His fingers traced across them until he found what he sought. A jar of pale clay, its surface smooth and unmarked, sealed with wax that bore Zeus's insignia. The king of gods had delivered this himself, saying only that it must be given to the woman when the time came. Hephaestus had not asked what lay inside. Some questions invited answers better left unspoken. He placed the jar on a separate table, away from the figure. Tomorrow, when the others arrived with their gifts, this too would be presented. But for now, it sat alone, unremarkable, containing whatever Zeus had deemed necessary for his purpose. A soft sound drew Hephaestus back to his workbench. The bellows had finally ceased their wheezing. The coals lay dark now, holding only the memory of heat. The workshop had grown cooler. He could feel the change against his skin, the way mountain air moves through open spaces when the sun withdraws its warmth. He lit oil lamps one by one. Their flames steadied and grew, pushing back the shadows without entirely banishing them. The light fell across Pandora's face, and for a moment it seemed she might open her eyes. But no, still clay, still waiting. Hephaestus pulled a wooden stool close to the table and sat. His back ached from the hours of standing, bending, shaping. He allowed himself this rest, this quiet vigil beside his creation. Outside, the sounds of Olympus had faded to near silence. Even gods required sleep, or at least the appearance of it. Only he remained awake, watching over the threshold between clay and life. He thought of Prometheus then, could not help but think of him, the Titan who had defied Zeus and paid the price. Chained to a rock at the world's edge, an eagle tearing at his liver each day, the flesh regenerating each night so the torment could begin anew. All because he had given mortals fire. All because he had looked upon their suffering and acted. Was this woman, then, the answering gift? Zeus called it a blessing for humanity, a companion, a completion of their kind, which until now had been only men, shaped from ash and clay by different hands in an earlier age. But Hephaestus knew his king, knew that gifts from Zeus often carried weight beyond their surface beauty. The clay figure seemed to listen to his thoughts, though she had no ears yet that could hear. Her face remained serene in the lamplight, peaceful as a lake at dawn. Whatever she would become, whatever role she would play in the pattern already woven, she did not know it. Could not know it. Innocence, perhaps, was its own kind of mercy. Hephaestus reached for a cloth and dampened it with water from a silver bowl. He wiped dust from his hands, cleaning each finger methodically. The water turned grey with residue, clay and ash and the invisible particles that filled any workshop where creation took place. He set the cloth aside and looked again at what he had made. She would be taller than mortal women when she stood. Her limbs held proportions that suggested both strength and grace. Her hair, when it gained color and texture, would fall in waves past her shoulders. Her skin, when breath animated it, would glow with a particular radiance that marked divine creation. The mortals who saw her would recognize something beyond their own making, even if they could not name it. Tomorrow morning, Athena would arrive first. The goddess of wisdom always rose before the others, her mind already working through the tasks and concerns of the day. She would bring her gifts with characteristic efficiency, skill in weaving and household crafts, knowledge of herbs and healing, perhaps a measure of wisdom itself, though how much Zeus would permit remained unclear. After Athena would come Aphrodite, trailing the scent of roses and sea foam. She would bestow beauty beyond measure, the kind that stopped hearts and started wars. Grace in movement, charm in speech. The dangerous gifts that men called blessings until they understood their cost. Then Hermes, the messenger, quick-witted and quicker-tongued. He would grant cunning and persuasive words, the ability to lie convincingly when necessary, to navigate the complex social waters of both divine and mortal worlds. These gifts would serve her well or poorly, depending on how one measured such things. And finally, Zeus himself would breathe life into the clay. His breath would fill her lungs, and her eyes would open, and she would rise from the table as something entirely new. The first woman of her kind, Pandora. All gifted. Hephaestus stood and stretched. His muscles protested the movement after so long in one position. He walked to the workshop door and pushed it open. Cool air rushed in, carrying the smell of night-blooming flowers and distant rain. The path outside gleamed with starlight, winding down through gardens and colonnades toward the central palace where Zeus kept his court. No sound came from that direction. All slept or feigned sleep. Even the wind had stilled. He turned back to the workshop, pulling the door closed behind him. The lamps flickered in the draught, but did not go out. Their light held steady, illuminating the space where clay waited to become flesh, where purpose would soon clothe itself in form and walk out into a world that did not yet know her name. Hephaestus returned to his stool beside the table. He would not sleep tonight. Could not, somehow. Instead, he would keep watch. It seemed fitting. He had made her with his hands, shaped her from earth and intention. The least he could do was remain present in these final hours before she woke. Before the gifts were given, and the plan set in motion, and the story began its inevitable unfolding. The lamps burned low. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. And in the workshop where marble met starlight, a figure of clay rested in the space between being and becoming, waiting for dawn and breath and the moment when potential would transform into presence, the hours passed in silence. No clock marked them. No bell tolled from the heights of Olympus. Time moved as it always did in such moments, both swift and eternal, measured only by the gradual shift of stars beyond the workshop's high windows. Hephaestus sat without moving, his gaze fixed on the clay figure before him. He had created many things in this room. Weapons for gods, armor that could turn aside the sun itself, chains strong enough to bind immortals. But this was different. This was not metal or stone. This was meant to breathe. He thought about the nature of creation itself, about what it meant to shape something that would walk and speak and make choices. The gods had done this before, of course. Mortals already walked the earth, men fashioned from ash and clay in an earlier age by hands that belonged to Prometheus and his brother. Those first humans had been rough things, crude and simple, barely more than animals. They had lived in caves and eaten raw meat and died young. Then Prometheus had stolen fire from Olympus, had carried it down the mountain in a fennel stalk, that hollow reed that burns slow and steady. He had given mortals flame, and with it, civilization. The punishment for that theft still echoed across the world. Every morning, the eagle came. Every morning, it tore into Prometheus with a beak that never dulled and talons that never missed. And every night, the Titan's body healed itself, restoring what had been destroyed so the cycle could begin again. An eternal punishment for an eternal crime. The gods called it justice. Hephaestus called it something else, though he kept the word to himself. Now Zeus had ordered this new creation, a woman to be gifted to mortals, the first of her kind among them. She would change everything. That much was certain. Whether the change would be kind or cruel remained to be seen. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. The gods spoke in grand terms of destiny and fate, but Hephaestus had learned that most outcomes were simpler than prophecy suggested. Actions led to consequences. Gifts carried obligations. Nothing given by Zeus came without strings attached. Invisible threads that pulled and guided long after the gift was received. He rose from his stool and walked to the far wall where shelves held materials from across the known world. Bronze from Crete, silver from Lorien's mines, gold dust collected from riverbeds where the sun god's chariot had passed too close to earth. He ran his fingers along the jars and boxes, not seeking anything in particular, simply moving to keep his mind from settling too deep into thought. Sometimes thinking was dangerous. Sometimes it led to questions that had no good answers. The workshop felt larger at night. Shadows filled the corners, and the ceiling disappeared into darkness beyond the reach of lamplight. During the day, this space hummed with activity. Apprentices worked the bellows. Metal rang against metal. Heat and noise and purpose filled every inch. But now, in these quiet hours, the room belonged to memory. Every tool on the wall had a history. Every burn mark on the floor told a story. This was where Hephaestus had forged Achilles' shield, that great round surface decorated with scenes of peace and war. This was where he had made Aphrodite's girdle, the one that made all who saw her helpless with desire. This was where he had crafted the golden throne that trapped his mother Hera when she sat upon it, revenge for the way she had cast him from Olympus at birth. The gods were not kind to their own. He had learned that early. Born malformed, his leg twisted, his foot turned inward, he had been deemed unworthy of divine perfection. Hera had looked at her newborn son and felt only shame. So she had thrown him from the mountain. He had fallen for a day and a night, falling through clouds and clear air until he struck the sea. The impact should have killed him. Would have killed anything mortal. But he was a god, however imperfect, and gods did not die so easily. The sea nymphs had found him, Thetis and Eurynome. They had taken him to their grotto beneath the waves and raised him there for 9 years. They had taught him kindness, which was rare among immortals. And he had taught himself craft, shaping metal and stone into objects of beauty and function. When he finally returned to Olympus, it was not as a beggar seeking acceptance, but as a master craftsman whose skills surpassed all others. Even Zeus, who had stood by and allowed Hera's cruelty, had been forced to acknowledge his worth. Hephaestus looked down at his hands. They were scarred from countless burns, marked by years of work, but they were steady. They had shaped the clay figure on the table with precision and care. Whatever else might be said of him, he did not create carelessly. Every detail mattered. Every curve and line served a purpose. He returned to the table and studied the jar that sat apart from everything else. The clay vessel was sealed with wax, marked with Zeus's seal. Nobody had told him what it contained. Instructions had been clear: create the woman, prepare the garments, set aside the jar. Do not open it. Do not question it. Simply ensure that it travels with her when she descends to the mortal world. The jar will be part of the gift, part of the completion of Zeus's design. Hephaestus did not like mysteries, but he understood his place in the divine hierarchy. He was the craftsman, not the architect. He shaped according to plans laid by others, and if those plans contained elements he found troubling, well, that was not his concern. Or so he told himself. The lie sat heavy in his chest. Outside, the first birds began to sing, not many yet. Just the earliest risers, those who greeted the sun before it, crested the eastern peaks. Their voices were thin and tentative in the pre-dawn darkness, but they marked a change. Night was ending. Morning approached, and with morning would come the gods bearing their gifts. Hephaestus trimmed the lamps, adding fresh oil so they would burn bright when Athena arrived. He wanted the light to be perfect, wanted everything to be ready. This was his role. Preparation. Precision. Making certain that when the moment came, no detail would be overlooked. He adjusted the position of the garments, ensuring they lay smooth and unwrinkled. He checked the sandals, confirming the leather straps were supple and clean. He wiped dust from the table's surface around the clay figure, though little dust had settled during the night. Then he stepped back and waited. The clay woman lay unchanged. Her face held that same serene expression. Her hands rested at her sides. She looked peaceful, innocent, unaware of the purposes being woven around her like threads on a loom. In some ways, she was the most honest thing in the room. She simply existed, waiting to become whatever she was meant to be. No ambition drove her. No fear troubled her. She was potential itself, pure and undefined. Hephaestus envied that purity. It would not last. Could not last. The moment Athena's hand touched her forehead, the moment Aphrodite breathed beauty into her features, the moment Hermes whispered cunning into her ears, that innocence would be replaced by something more complex, more dangerous. More human, in a way, though she would be divine in origin. The sky beyond the windows began to lighten. Not with full dawn yet, just the first suggestion of gray replacing black. The stars faded one by one, surrendering to the approaching day. Soon the sun would rise, and with it would come all that had been decided. The gifts would be given, life would enter clay, and she would stand and speak her first words and become Pandora, all-gifted, bearer of mysteries, walking answer to Prometheus's theft. Hephaestus took a deep breath and settled back onto his stool. His work was done. Now came the waiting. And then, soon enough, the beginning. The light changed slowly. Gray became silver. Silver became pale gold. The eastern sky warmed like metal in a forge, glowing from within before it caught fire. Hephaestus watched through the high windows as the transformation completed itself. Dawn arrived not with fanfare, but with inevitability. The last stars vanished. The world turned visible again. Footsteps sounded on the stone path outside, light footsteps, measured and deliberate. Athena did not rush. She never rushed. Everything she did was calculated, purposeful, executed with the precision of a battle plan. The door opened without knock or announcement. She entered the workshop as if she had been expected all along, which of course she had been. She wore armor, as always. Bronze breastplate polished to a mirror shine, helmet tucked under one arm, spear held loosely in her other hand. Her grey eyes swept the room, taking in every detail. The clay figure, the garments, the sealed jar, the trimmed lamps. She nodded once, approving. Then she set down her spear and approached the table. Hephaestus rose from his stool. His leg protested the movement after hours of stillness. He ignored it. Pain was familiar. It had been his companion since birth. He limped to the far side of the table, positioning himself opposite Athena. Between them, the clay woman waited. "Is everything prepared?" Athena said. Her voice carried no particular inflection. It was a simple question requiring a simple answer. "It is. The garments are woven as instructed. They are. And the jar, sealed." Untouched, Athena's gaze lingered on the clay vessel for a moment. Something flickered in her expression, not quite concern. Not quite curiosity. Something else, harder to name. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual composed neutrality. "Zeus has ordered specific gifts," she said. "Each of us is to contribute something. I will give her skill in weaving and handicraft. Aphrodite will provide beauty and grace. Hermes will grant her speech and cunning. Apollo offers music. Demeter, understanding of the seasons. Each god adds something to the design." Hephaestus said nothing. He knew all this already. Instructions had been clear from the beginning, but Athena was methodical. She liked to confirm details, to ensure nothing had been overlooked. She reached out and placed her hand on the clay figure's forehead. Her palm rested there for several heartbeats. When she withdrew it, something had changed. The clay looked different, still clay, but warmer somehow, as if a spark had been planted deep within, waiting to catch flame. "The capacity for craft is there now," Athena said. "When she wakes, her hands will know how to shape thread and pattern. She will understand tension and balance. The knowledge exists inside her, though she has never practiced it." She stepped back from the table. Her armor caught the lamplight, throwing fragments of brightness across the walls. Outside, the sun had fully risen. Birds sang loudly now, greeting the day with enthusiasm. The workshop no longer felt like a cave of shadows. It had become an ordinary space, filled with ordinary morning light. "The others will come soon," Athena said. "Aphrodite arrives with the second hour. She dislikes early rising. And Zeus. Zeus will not come himself. He will send Hermes as his messenger. To deliver final instructions and ensure the plan proceeds as ordered." Hephaestus nodded. Of course, Zeus would not appear personally. Kings did not dirty their hands with details. They commanded from thrones and left the work to others. It had always been this way, would always be this way. The only constant in the divine realm was hierarchy and one's place within it. Athena walked to the window and looked out across Olympus. From here, the whole divine city spread below, white marble temples, gardens filled with flowers that never faded, fountains flowing with water that tasted of starlight. Everything perfect, everything eternal. Nothing truly alive in the way mortal things were alive. "This will change the world," she said quietly. Her back was to Hephaestus, so he could not see her face. "Zeus intends it as punishment for Prometheus's theft. But punishment often spreads beyond its intended target. Mortals will receive her as a gift. They will not understand what she carries. What she brings with her." She paused. The silence stretched between them like a taut string. "Do you think it just?" Hephaestus asked. He had not meant to speak. The question simply emerged, unbidden. Athena did not turn around. "Justice is complex," she said. "Zeus rules. We serve. The rest is philosophy, and philosophy does not feed the hungry or ease the suffering. But you are goddess of wisdom. Surely wisdom has something to say about this." Now she turned. Her grey eyes met his. They were old eyes, despite her youthful appearance. Eyes that had seen too much, understood too much, and carried that understanding like a weight. "Wisdom knows when to speak and when to remain silent," she said. "This is a time for silence." Before Hephaestus could respond, new footsteps sounded outside, lighter than Athena's, almost floating. A scent preceded the arrival, sweet and overwhelming. Roses and honey and something else, something that made the air feel thick and warm. The door opened again. Aphrodite entered like sunlight breaking through clouds. She wore a gown the color of dawn, pink and gold and shimmering with every movement. Her hair fell in perfect waves. Her face was so beautiful it hurt to look at directly, like staring into a flame. She smiled when she saw the clay figure, a smile both delighted and predatory. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh, how perfect, how absolutely perfect. Hephaestus, you have outdone yourself." She is a blank canvas waiting for color and life. She approached the table without hesitation, her movements graceful and assured. When she reached the clay figure, she leaned down and breathed softly across its face. Just a breath. Nothing more. But where her breath touched, the clay seemed to glow. Warmth spread across the features. The face became more defined, more symmetrical. Beauty settled into it like dust into cracks. "There," Aphrodite said, straightening. "Now she has appeal. Now she will turn heads and capture hearts. Every mortal who sees her will feel desire, whether they wish to or not. That is my gift. Irresistibility." Hephaestus looked at the clay figure. It was no longer quite so innocent-looking. The face held power now. Dangerous power. The kind that started wars and toppled kingdoms. He felt a deep unease settle into his stomach. "Is that truly a gift?" he said. "Or a curse?" Aphrodite laughed. The sound was like bells, clear and ringing. "All gifts are curses when given to the wrong person," she said. "And all curses are gifts if one knows how to use them. She will learn." They all learn eventually. She moved to the garments and touched them lightly, her fingers trailing across the white fabric. Where she touched, the cloth seemed to shimmer. When she finished, the simple garments had become something more. They would catch light, draw eyes, make the wearer unforgettable. "My work is complete," Aphrodite announced. "Who comes next, Apollo, I believe?" Athena said. Then Demeter. Then Hermes to finish. And then she wakes, then she wakes. Aphrodite glanced once more at the clay figure, now transformed by beauty into something both wonderful and terrible. Then she left as quickly as she had arrived, trailing perfume and golden light. The door closed behind her. Hephaestus remained at the table. Athena stood by the window. Neither spoke. Outside, Olympus went about its immortal business, oblivious or indifferent to what was being created in this small workshop. The clay woman lay unchanged, yet utterly changed. Gifts were being layered into her like sediment in stone. Each gift added something. Each gift took something away. By noon, she would be complete. By evening, she would walk. And after that, the world would turn in ways even the gods could not fully predict. Hephaestus looked at his scarred hands and wondered if he should have refused this task. But gods did not refuse Zeus, not if they wished to remain gods. So he waited, and the morning passed. And more footsteps came. Apollo arrived when the sun stood directly overhead. The light changed first. It flooded through the high windows with sudden intensity, turning the workshop bright and warm. Then came the sound of footsteps, measured and musical, as if each step struck a note only gods could hear. The door opened without being pushed. He stood in the doorway for a moment, backlit and radiant. Golden hair, golden skin. Everything about him suggested light and music and the kind of perfection that mortals wrote songs about. He carried a lyre under one arm, its strings humming faintly with sympathetic vibration to some melody only it could sense. His eyes swept the room, taking in Hephaestus at his bench, Athena by the window, and the clay figure on the table. "So this is Zeus's masterpiece," Apollo said. His voice was smooth, pleasant, utterly confident. The woman designed to punish the audacity of mortals. Strange how punishment so often wears a beautiful face. He crossed to the table without waiting for invitation. His movements were fluid, graceful in ways that made Hephaestus feel even more aware of his own awkward gait. Apollo leaned over the clay figure, studying it with the detached interest of someone examining a work of art in which he had no personal investment. "She has beauty already," he observed. Aphrodite's work, obviously, and intelligence, I assume. Athena would not visit without leaving her mark. "So, what remains for me to add, music?" Athena said from her position by the window. Grace of speech. The ability to charm and persuade, Apollo nodded slowly. He set his lyre on the table beside the clay figure, then placed both hands over her chest, just above where a heart would beat if she possessed one yet. He closed his eyes. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the workshop filled with sound. It was not loud. It was barely audible. But it resonated in the bones and blood, a harmony that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The lyre strings vibrated in response. The clay figure's chest rose and fell once, as if drawing breath, though she remained motionless otherwise. When Apollo lifted his hands, something had changed. The clay seemed warmer, more responsive, as if sound itself had been woven into her substance. "There," Apollo said, stepping back. "She will speak with voices like water over stones. Every word will carry music. When she laughs, people will want to hear it again. When she weeps, they will feel her sorrow in their own hearts. She will move through the world like a living song, and mortals will not understand why they cannot look away." He picked up his lyre again, cradling it against his chest. His expression was thoughtful, almost troubled. "Does she know what she is?" he asked. "Will she understand when she wakes?" "No," Athena said quietly. "She will wake without memory, without context. Zeus wants her innocent of understanding. A weapon that does not know it cuts." Apollo's jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered behind his golden eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or recognition of cruelty, but it passed quickly, smoothed over by the same divine detachment that allowed gods to watch mortals suffer and call it fate. "Then my work here is finished," he said. He moved toward the door, then paused. "Hephaestus, you shaped her well. Too well, maybe. When mortals receive gifts from gods, they should remember to ask what the gift costs. But they never do." He left. The bright light dimmed to normal levels. The workshop felt smaller, quieter, as if something essential had been removed along with Apollo's presence. Hephaestus looked at the clay figure. She was changing, becoming more than clay, more than shaped earth. Each visiting god left something behind, layered like paint on canvas. Soon, nothing of the original material would remain visible. Only the gifts, only what had been added. Time passed. Not long. Perhaps an hour. The sun shifted westward, its light taking on the amber quality of afternoon. Then new footsteps approached, heavier than Apollo's. Steady and grounded. The door opened to reveal Demeter. She wore robes the color of wheat fields in late summer, gold and brown and green all mixed together. Her hair was braided with wildflowers that somehow remained fresh despite being plucked hours ago. She carried a basket over one arm, filled with seeds and grain and small fruits that gave off a rich, earthy scent. Her face was kind but worn, marked by seasons of plenty and famine both. "Hephaestus," she greeted him with a nod. "Athena." She approached the table slowly, as if reluctant. When she reached the clay figure, she set down her basket and placed one hand flat against the figure's stomach, her eyes closed. Her lips moved, whispering words in a language older than Olympus, older perhaps than the gods themselves, words that tasted of soil and rain and the deep patience of growing things. "I give her connection to the earth," Demeter said softly, "knowledge of seasons and cycles. She will understand planting and harvest, when to sow, when to reap. She will feel the turn of the year in her bones, know winter from summer by instinct rather than observation. This gift is practical, necessary. Mortals must eat, after all." She opened her eyes, looked down at the clay figure with something approaching pity. "But I give her something else as well," Demeter continued. "The knowledge of loss, of things taken before their time. She will understand grief, though she has experienced nothing yet. This is not cruelty, it is preparation. The world she enters is not kind. Better she knows this from the beginning than learns it slowly." Demeter withdrew her hand. The clay figure's skin had taken on a different quality now, less stone, more flesh, as if the connection to earth had made her more human, more vulnerable. Demeter picked up her basket and turned away. "I wish Zeus had chosen differently," she said to no one in particular. "Prometheus stole fire, yes. But mortals were cold. They were dying. Sometimes theft is the only path to survival. Punishing them for accepting warmth seems like punishing a drowning man for grasping at driftwood." "Your objection is noted," Athena said. Her voice was neutral. "And disregarded." Demeter's expression hardened. But she said nothing more. She simply left, her robes trailing behind her like autumn leaves. The door closed. Silence settled back into the workshop like dust after a storm. Hephaestus remained at the table. He did not count the gods who had come or calculate how many remained. Time on Olympus moved strangely, and afternoon could last for hours or mere moments depending on divine whim. He watched the clay figure instead. Watched as she became less his creation and more theirs. Each gift altered her, changed her purpose. By the time they finished, she would carry the weight of divine intention like a stone in her chest. The sealed jar sat nearby, still untouched. He tried not to look at it, tried not to think about what it contained or why Zeus had commanded it be given to her. Some questions had answers that made the world worse for knowing them. So he focused on his hands instead, on the scars that marked them, on the calluses earned through centuries of working metal and stone. Outside, Olympus continued its eternal business. Fountains flowed, gardens bloomed. Gods moved through their endless days, beautiful and terrible and utterly removed from consequence. And in the workshop, the clay woman waited. Not yet alive, not yet human, but closer now. So much closer than she had been at dawn. One more god would come before evening, Hermes the messenger, the trickster, the god of boundaries and transitions, of doorways and thresholds. He would bring the final gifts. After him, there would be nothing left to add. After him, she would wake. Hephaestus waited. The afternoon light turned golden, then amber, then the deep orange that preceded sunset. Shadows grew longer across the workshop floor. And still he waited, because waiting was all that remained. Hermes arrived as the sun touched the western hills. His footsteps were light, quick, almost soundless. The door swung open without creaking, and he slipped through like wind finding a gap in stone. He wore traveling boots that never wore out, and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head. His staff, the caduceus, was wrapped with two serpents that seemed to breathe even in carved form. He grinned when he saw Hephaestus. It was not a kind expression, not cruel either. Simply the grin of someone who found the world endlessly amusing and rarely stayed still long enough to explain why. "Last one," Hermes announced. "After me, she wakes." Zeus has been very specific about timing. He circled the table, examined the clay figure from different angles, tilted his head, whistled low. "She looks almost finished," he said. "Almost real. The others did good work. Though I suppose when Father commands, everyone brings their best." Athena stood near the wall. She had remained throughout the afternoon, watching each god arrive and depart. Her presence was constant as stone. She nodded at Hermes but said nothing. He paid her no mind. Hephaestus stepped back from the table, gave Hermes room. The messenger god was unpredictable, quick to act, faster to vanish. Standing too close to him felt like standing near a fire that might leap in any direction. Hermes placed both hands on the clay figure's forehead. His touch was gentler than expected, almost careful. He closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice dropped to something quieter than usual. Something that might have been serious if one listened closely. "I give her cunning," he said. "The ability to see paths others miss, to find doors where walls appear solid. She will understand deception not as cruelty, but as survival. The world is full of those who take advantage. Better she knows how to navigate it." He paused. His fingers pressed slightly harder against the clay. "I give her curiosity," he continued, "an appetite for knowing, for understanding, for opening what is closed and seeing what is hidden. This gift is dangerous. I know that. Curiosity has destroyed wiser beings than her. But without it, she will be only what we make her. With it, she might become something more." He removed his hands, opened his eyes. The grin returned, but it looked strained now, forced. "There," he said, "all done. She has everything she needs. Beauty, grace, intelligence, charm, connection to earth and sky, and everything between. She is perfect. She is a weapon," Athena said from the wall. Hermes shrugged. "Aren't we all?" He turned to leave, stopped at the door, looked back at Hephaestus. "You did good work," Hermes said. "The craftsmanship is flawless. Father will be pleased. Though I suspect you already know that pleasing Father and doing right are not always the same thing." Then he was gone. The door swung shut. The workshop fell silent again. But this silence felt different, heavier, as if the air itself had become thick with waiting. Hephaestus approached the table slowly, looked down at what he had made, what they had made. The clay figure lay still. Her skin was no longer gray. It had taken on the color of living flesh. Her hair, once carved stone, now fell in soft waves that moved slightly as if stirred by breath. Her lips were parted. Her eyelids closed but not sealed. She looked human, completely, undeniably, as if she might open her eyes at any moment and speak. And perhaps she would. Perhaps that moment was coming. The sun was almost gone. Evening approached. Zeus had said she would wake at dusk. Athena crossed the room, stood beside Hephaestus. Together they looked at the sleeping figure between them. "Do you remember," Athena said quietly, "when we were younger?" Hephaestus glanced at her. Gods did not age, but they had beginnings. Early days when the world was newer and their roles less defined. "I remember," he said. "Father threw you from Olympus," Athena continued, "twice if the stories are true. Once as an infant, once as a youth. Both times for displeasing him. Both times you survived, but the falls left marks," she gestured at his twisted leg. The limp he carried everywhere. "You learned to forge," she said. "To create. To make things of beauty despite the pain. You turned cruelty into craft. That is why I respect you, Hephaestus. Not because you are strong, because you endured." He said nothing, did not know what to say. Athena rarely spoke of such things. She will endure too, Athena said, nodding toward the clay figure. Or she will not. Either way, the choice was never hers, just as your falls were never your choice. The difference is that you had time to become yourself before the world broke you. She will wake already broken, already carrying what we have placed inside her. Then why help? Hephaestus asked. If you believe this is wrong, why stand here and watch? Athena's expression did not change. Because refusal would change nothing. Another god would take my place. At least this way, I know what she carries. Knowledge. Wisdom. The ability to think. These are not small gifts. They may not save her, but they give her a chance. The light outside shifted. The deep orange faded to purple. Stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The workshop grew dim. Hephaestus lit no lamps, did not reach for fire. He simply stood in the growing darkness and watched. The clay figure's chest moved. A small motion, barely visible, but unmistakable. Breath. Shallow and uncertain, but breath nonetheless. Her fingers twitched, curled slightly, relaxed again. Athena stepped back. It is done, she said. She wakes, and she did. Slowly, as if rising from deep water. The clay figure's eyelids fluttered, opened. Her eyes were dark, brown like rich earth. They stared upward at the ceiling without focus, then moved. Found Hephaestus, found Athena. He blinked, drew another breath, this one deeper. Her lips parted. A small sound escaped, not words, just air shaped by confusion. Hephaestus leaned closer. Can you hear me? He asked. She turned her head toward his voice. Slowly, as if the motion required thought. Her eyes focused. Recognition flickered across her face. Not recognition of him specifically, but recognition of sight, of sound, of being. Yes, she whispered. Her voice was soft, musical, exactly as Apollo had intended. Do you know where you are? She looked around. At the workshop. The tools. The high windows showing evening sky. Her gaze lingered on each detail as if memorizing it. Finally, she looked back at Hephaestus. No, she said, I do not know. Should I? You are on Olympus, Athena said from the shadows. You were made here. By us. For a purpose, the clay figure sat up. The motion was awkward, unpracticed. She looked at her hands, turned them over, studied the lines on her palms, touched her face, her hair, as if confirming she existed. What is my name? She asked. Hephaestus hesitated. Zeus had not told him, had not given her a name. Perhaps that was intentional. Perhaps she was meant to be unnamed. A thing, rather than a person. But Athena spoke before he could. Pandora, she said. Your name is Pandora. All gifted. Because each of us gave you something, Pandora repeated the name silently. Testing it. Then nodded. Accepted it. She looked at the sealed jar nearby. It sat on the table beside where she had lain, her eyes fixed on it. Did not move away. What is that? She asked. A gift, Hephaestus said. The word felt like ash in his mouth. From Zeus. You are to carry it with you. Keep it safe. Never open it. Pandora reached toward the jar. Stopped before touching it. Her hand hovered in the air, trembling slightly. Why? She asked. Because he commands it, Athena said. Pandora looked at her. Then at Hephaestus. Her expression was difficult to read. Curious, uncertain. And something else. Something that might have been fear, or might have been understanding. I see, she said quietly. And in that moment, Hephaestus knew she would open it. Not today. Perhaps not tomorrow. But eventually, curiosity Hermes had given her, the appetite for knowing, and the jar sat sealed, unknowable, a question without answer. She would open it, because that was what she had been made to do. Pandora stood, her legs shook. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. The workshop floor was cold beneath her bare feet. She took one step, then another. Each movement required concentration, as if her body was still learning what it meant to be solid, to be real. Hephaestus watched her, did not move to help. She needed to find her balance alone. Gods could not carry her forever. Eventually she would walk the earth, and there would be no divine hands to catch her if she fell. "Where am I to go?" she asked. Her voice was stronger now, more certain. "To the mortal world," Athena said. "You will be given to a man named Epimetheus, brother of Prometheus. He will accept you as his bride." Pandora turned to face Athena fully. "Will he know what I am?" "No," Athena said. "He will see only a gift from Zeus, a woman of impossible beauty. He will not question. That is his nature, to accept without thinking." "And the jar?" Pandora asked. "What does it contain?" Hephaestus and Athena exchanged a glance. Neither spoke immediately. The question hung in the air like smoke. Heavy, unavoidable. Finally, Hephaestus answered. "We do not know," he said. "Zeus sealed it himself. He told no one. But he was explicit. You must never open it. No matter what you hear, no matter what you feel." Pandora looked at the jar again. Her expression had changed. The uncertainty was still there, but beneath it something harder had formed. A kind of quiet determination. "If I am never to open it," she said, "why give it to me at all? Why not leave it sealed in some vault? Why place it in my hands and command me to resist?" Athena's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "Because Zeus wishes to test Prometheus through his brother." "Through you. Prometheus stole fire from Olympus, gave it to mortals, defied divine will. Zeus cannot touch Prometheus directly now. The punishment is already set. But Epimetheus remains free. And you are the instrument of his testing. I am bait," Pandora said flatly. "Yes," Athena replied. "You are," Pandora nodded slowly. Absorbed this, did not argue, did not weep. She simply accepted the truth as she had accepted her name, as one accepts rain or wind or any other unchangeable fact of existence. "Then I will go," she said, "because I have no choice. Just as you had no choice but to make me. Just as Hephaestus had no choice but to shape me from clay. We are all instruments. All playing roles Zeus has written. Her words carried no bitterness, only acknowledgement." She moved toward the jar, picked it up. It was heavy, solid ceramic, sealed with wax and bound with cord. The weight settled into her arms like a sleeping child. She held it against her chest, felt its surface, smooth and cool, silent. "What if I refuse?" she asked quietly. "What if I tell Epimetheus the truth? Tell him what I am?" "What I carry, you will not," Athena said, "because Hermes gave you cunning, survival instinct. You will do what keeps you alive. And defying Zeus does not keep anyone alive, not gods, not mortals, not creatures made from clay and divine gifts." Pandora looked down at the jar. Her fingers traced the seal. The wax was red, deep crimson like old blood. She could feel something beneath her touch. Not sound exactly, not movement, but presence. Something inside aware of being held. "It knows I am here," she whispered. Hephaestus limped closer. "What do you mean, the jar?" Pandora said. "Whatever is inside. It knows I hold it. I can feel it waiting. Athena stepped forward from the shadows. Her face was grave. Then do not give it what it wants, she said. Keep it sealed, always. That is your purpose, your test. To carry what must not be opened, to resist what calls to you. Pandora met Athena's gaze. For a long moment, neither spoke. Two pairs of eyes locked. One ancient and grey as stone, the other new and brown as earth. You do not believe I will succeed, Pandora said. Not a question. A statement. No, Athena admitted. I do not. But I hope I am wrong, Pandora smiled then. A small, sad curve of her lips. Thank you for honesty. Most gods lie beautifully. You at least give me truth. She turned to Hephaestus. Will you walk me to the door? He nodded, gestured for her to follow. They moved through the workshop together, past the cooling forges, past the tools hung on walls, past half-finished projects abandoned in bronze and silver. The door stood at the far end, tall and wooden, reinforced with iron bands. Hephaestus opened it. Beyond lay the courtyard of Olympus, white marble gleaming under stars. The air smelled of ambrosia and something else, something like roses and ash mixed together. A figure waited in the courtyard, tall and broad-shouldered. Zeus himself had come. He stood with arms crossed. His face was stern, handsome in the way mountains are handsome, imposing and indifferent to mortal concerns. Lightning flickered in his eyes when he saw Pandora emerge. You are ready, he said, not a question. A command disguised as observation. Pandora bowed her head. I am as you made me, Zeus smiled. The expression did not reach his eyes. Good. Hermes will escort you to the mortal world. To Epimetheus. You will be welcomed there. Loved, cherished. All you must do is keep the jar sealed. He stepped closer, looked down at her. She was tall for a mortal woman, but Zeus towered over her like a thunderhead towers over hills. You understand the importance of this? He asked. I understand, Pandora said. I am to carry what must not be opened, to resist what calls, to bring suffering through my existence. Zeus's smile faded. You were given wisdom, he said slowly. Perhaps too much. Remember your place, creation. You serve my will. Nothing more I remember, Pandora replied. Her voice did not waver. Zeus studied her, then nodded, turned away. Hermes, he called. The messenger god appeared from nowhere, or perhaps from everywhere. He wore his traveling boots and wide-brimmed hat. His caduceus glinted in starlight. The carved serpent seemed to move along its length. Take her, Zeus commanded. Deliver her to Epimetheus. Ensure he accepts her. Then return. As you wish, Hermes said. He looked at Pandora. Winked. Come along, all gifted. Time to meet your husband. Pandora glanced back at Hephaestus. He stood in the doorway of his workshop. His twisted leg gave him an uneven stance. His face was hard to read in shadow. Thank you, she said quietly. For making me well. He said nothing. Only watched as Hermes took her arm and led her away across the marble courtyard. Watched as they descended the steps. Watched as they disappeared into the night sky, winged sandals carrying them toward earth. Athena emerged from the workshop behind him, stood beside him in silence. She will open it, Hephaestus said finally. Yes, Athena agreed, she will. Could we have stopped this? No. Should we have tried? Athena did not answer. The question hung between them. Unanswered. Unanswerable. They stood together in the doorway and looked out at the empty courtyard. Somewhere far below, in the mortal world, Pandora was descending, carrying her jar, carrying her fate. The stars wheeled overhead. Indifferent and eternal. The night deepened. And on Olympus, two gods who had helped create disaster stood silent, watching the darkness where she had gone. The descent through darkness was not gentle. Hermes held Pandora's arm as they fell through clouds and starlight, his winged sandals beating a rhythm that sounded almost like laughter. The jar pressed against her chest. She clutched it with both hands, feeling the weight grow heavier with each breath. The world rose up to meet them, first as shadow, then as shape, mountains dark against darker sky, rivers catching moonlight like silver thread, and somewhere below, scattered points of firelight marking mortal settlements. "Your new home," Hermes said. His voice carried no particular warmth. "Epimetheus lives there, in that valley." "See the house with the olive grove?" Pandora looked where he pointed. A dwelling stood alone among trees. Modest, stone walls and a thatched roof. Smoke rose from a chimney, thin and grey against the night. "He lives alone?" she asked. "Since his brother was chained to a rock for defying Zeus." "Yes." Quite alone, Hermes tilted his head. "You will be company for him, a gift to ease his grief. That is the story we tell. And the true story?" Hermes grinned, teeth white in moonlight. "The true story is you are punishment wearing a beautiful face. Revenge dressed as blessing. Zeus is very good at this sort of thing." They descended faster. The ground rushed up. Pandora's stomach lurched. Then Hermes touched down in the olive grove, light as a feather settling on water. He released her arm and she stumbled, catching herself against a tree trunk. The jar nearly slipped. She grabbed it tight. Her heart pounded. "Careful," Hermes said. "Drop that and we all suffer. Even me. Especially me." "I do not want to explain to Zeus how his grand design shattered on an olive root." Pandora straightened, adjusted her grip. The jar felt worn now, as if something inside had noticed the change, had sensed arrival. "What do I tell him?" she asked. "Epimetheus. What do I say? Tell him you are Pandora. Tell him the gods have sent you." "Tell him anything you like," Hermes shrugged. "He is Epimetheus." Afterthought. "He will accept you before thinking to question. It is his nature. His brother was Prometheus, forethought. Yes. One brother thinks ahead, one thinks after. Prometheus warned him never to accept gifts from Zeus." Hermes smiled. "But Prometheus is not here to remind him." Convenient. Really, Pandora looked toward the house. Light glowed in one window. A figure moved inside, visible as shadow against lamplight. Tall, broad at the shoulders, moving slowly as if tired. "He grieves," she said quietly. "Of course he grieves. His brother screams on a mountain while eagles eat his liver. Every day, forever." "Grief is appropriate." Hermes checked the sky. Calculated something. "I must return. Zeus will want confirmation of delivery. You know what to do. Marry him. Live quietly. Keep the jar sealed." He did not wait for response. His sandals lifted him into air. He rose swiftly, became shadow, then star, then nothing. Pandora stood alone in the olive grove. The night pressed around her. Cicadas sang in the trees. Somewhere distant, an owl called. The jar's weight settled into her arms like a child, like something living that needed holding. She walked toward the house, each step uncertain. Her feet found stones and roots and soft earth. She had never walked on ground before. Everything felt strange, new. The air smelled of wood smoke and wild herbs, nothing like the forges of Olympus. The door stood closed. Light leaked beneath it. She could hear movement inside, the scrape of pottery, the rustle of fabric, someone preparing for sleep. Pandora raised one hand, knocked. 3 times, clear and steady. The movement inside stopped. Silence stretched. Then footsteps approached. Heavy, deliberate. The door opened. Epimetheus stood in lamplight looking out at her. He was handsome in an understated way. Brown hair, kind eyes, a face that had known laughter once but had forgotten how recently. He wore a simple tunic. His feet were bare. He stared at her, then at the jar, then back at her face. "Who are you?" His voice was rough with disuse. "My name is Pandora," she said. "The gods have sent me." His expression changed. "Shuttered." "Then I want nothing to do with you. Leave. Wait. No." Epimetheus stepped back, began to close the door. "My brother warned me. Never accept gifts from gods, especially Zeus. You are a trick, a trap. Whatever you carry brings ruin. I am not a trap," Pandora said. The words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "I am only what I was made to be." "Then you are exactly a trap." He looked at her with something like pity. "Go back to Olympus. Tell Zeus I refuse." The door began to swing shut. Pandora felt panic rise. Not because she feared Zeus's anger, but because standing alone in the dark with the jar felt impossible suddenly. The weight, the presence inside that knew her and called to her with wordless insistence. "Please," she said. "I have nowhere else to go." Epimetheus paused. The door half closed. He studied her through the gap, looked at her face. Her eyes, the way she held the jar as if it might slip away. "You are afraid," he said slowly. "Yes, of what?" "Of everything." Pandora met his gaze. "I was born today. I have never been alone. I do not know what to do." "And the jar," she stopped. Could not finish. "What about the jar?" Epimetheus asked. "It must not be opened," Pandora whispered. "That is all I know. It must never be opened, but it wants to be. And I do not know if I am strong enough to keep it sealed." Long silence. Epimetheus looked at her. Really looked. Saw something there. Recognition, perhaps. Or understanding. Or simply the exhaustion of someone who had carried too much weight for too long and recognized the burden in another's arms. He opened the door wider, stepped aside. "Come in," he said quietly. "You can stay tonight. We will decide the rest tomorrow." Pandora entered. The house was small, one room. A hearth with dying embers, a table, a bed in the corner, shelves lined with clay jars and dried herbs. The walls were bare stone, the floor packed earth. She stood in the center holding her jar, not knowing where to put herself or what to do with her hands. Epimetheus closed the door, barred it, turned to face her. "You said you were born today, yes. And Zeus sent you here, yes, to marry me. That is what they said." He laughed. "Brief and bitter, of course." "Of course he did. Prometheus steals fire for humanity, and Zeus responds by sending me a wife." He shook his head. "Gods think themselves clever. They mistake cruelty for wit." Pandora said nothing. The jar pulsed in her arms. She could feel it now. Definitely feel it. A rhythm like heartbeat. A warmth like fever. Something inside waking. "Put it down," Epimetheus said. "Whatever that is." "Put it down before you drop it." "I cannot." "Why not?" "Because I am afraid if I let go I will never pick it up again." Pandora's voice cracked. "And I must. I must hold it. That is my purpose." Epimetheus watched her. Something shifted in his expression, softened. "What is your name again?" "Pandora, all-gifted," he translated. "They gave you a name of irony." "They gave me everything," Pandora said. "Beauty, voice, ning, wisdom. And they gave me this jar and told me never to open it. That is the sum of my existence. Gifts and prohibition. Welcome to mortality," Epimetheus said softly. "We are all gifts carrying prohibitions." He gestured to the corner. "There, put the jar there. against the wall. Then sit. Rest. You look like you might collapse. Pandora walked to the corner, set the jar down carefully, stepped back. Her arms felt strange without its weight, empty and light and wrong. The jar sat in shadow, sealed, silent, waiting. She stood in the center of the room with empty arms. The absence felt worse than carrying weight. Her hands hung useless at her sides. Epimetheus moved to the hearth, knelt, added wood to the dying coals. Flames caught slowly. Yellow light spread across the floor. Shadows retreated to corners but did not vanish entirely. "You must be hungry," he said. His voice was quiet. "Matter of fact, gods never think of such things when they send gifts." "I do not know," Pandora said. "I do not know what hunger is." He glanced up at her. "You will learn soon enough." From the shelves he took bread, cheese wrapped in cloth, a clay jug of water, set them on the table, gestured for her to sit. Pandora lowered herself onto the wooden bench. It creaked beneath her. The sound felt too loud, too real. Everything here was rough and worn and carried the marks of use. Nothing like Olympus, where beauty required no maintenance and perfection needed no care. Epimetheus sat across from her, broke the bread with his hands, offered her half. "Eat," she took it. The bread was coarse, grainy, still slightly warm from earlier baking. She bit into it and tasted earth and grain and something unnamed that made her throat tighten. "What is wrong?" Epimetheus asked. "Nothing. Everything." "I do not have words. The bread is old," he said. "I apologize. I bake only once a week." Living alone, you learn to stretch supplies. No. The bread is perfect. Pandora set it down carefully. That is what is wrong. It is perfect, and I can taste it, and I know that someday I will not be able to taste anything ever again. Understanding crossed his face. "You are mortal now." "Yes. How does that feel?" "Like standing at the edge of a cliff I cannot see." Pandora wrapped her arms around herself. "Like carrying a second jar I cannot put down. One that grows heavier with every breath." Epimetheus nodded slowly. "That is mortality. The weight of knowing. We carry it from birth. You were given it complete in a single moment." He poured water into 2 cups, pushed one toward her. "My brother used to say that humans were better off not knowing," Epimetheus continued. "That ignorance was mercy. But then he gave them fire anyway, and with fire came knowledge, cooking, metalwork, medicine, all the gifts that separate humans from beasts. Zeus punished him," Pandora said. "Yes." Pain flickered across Epimetheus's face, brief but unmistakable. "He is chained to a rock in the Caucasus. An eagle comes each day, eats his liver. At night it grows back. Tomorrow the eagle returns, forever, because he pitied mortals, because he loved them more than he feared gods." Epimetheus drank from his cup. Prometheus means forethought. He sees what is coming. He saw this punishment and gave them fire anyway. That is what makes him a hero, or a fool. I have never decided which. "And your name?" Pandora asked. What does Epimetheus mean? Afterthought. He smiled without humor. "I am the one who understands too late, who accepts gifts first and questions them later. Prometheus warned me before they took him. Never accept anything from Olympus, especially from Zeus. No matter how beautiful the offering," he looked at her directly. "Yet here you are." And I opened the door. "You could still send me away," Pandora said. "I could, but you will not." "No." Epimetheus set down his cup. "Because I looked at your face and saw someone even more trapped than me, and because living alone makes you foolish. You start talking to shadows and answering yourself. Another voice in this house would be welcome, even if it brings disaster." The fire crackled. Outside, an owl called from the olive grove, long and mournful. Pandora listened to it fade into silence. "The jar," she said finally. "What is inside it, you do not know? They would not tell me, only that I must never open it. That it contains things mortals were not meant to endure. Then why send it at all?" Epimetheus leaned back, studied the shadowed corner where the jar waited. Why create something forbidden and place it within reach? Gods could have kept it on Olympus, buried it in Tartarus. "Why give it to you?" "Because they knew I would be curious," Pandora said slowly. The understanding came as she spoke, cold and certain. They made me curious. Athena gave me wisdom. Hermes gave me cunning, but Hera gave me something else. She stood beside me and I felt it enter. A hunger. A need to know, to understand, to possess what is hidden. Then you are the lock and the key. Both, Epimetheus said quietly. The prohibition and the means to break it, yes. They sat in silence. The fire burned lower, shadows grew longer. The jar remained in its corner, sealed, patient, waiting with the certainty of fate already written. Pandora felt it calling, not with words, not with sound, but with a pull like gravity, like standing on the edge of that invisible cliff and feeling the wind push from behind. "How long can you resist?" Epimetheus asked. He was watching her face, reading something there. "I do not know," Pandora whispered. "Forever, perhaps. Or until tomorrow. Or until the next moment when I stop paying attention. Then we must pay attention together." He stood, crossed to a wooden chest beside the bed, opened it, withdrew a length of rope, thick and coarse, woven from hemp. "What are you doing? Giving you a chance?" Epimetheus carried the rope to the corner, wrapped it around the jar, once, twice, 3 times, tied it with complex knots that would take time to undo. Then he looped the end through an iron ring set into the wall and secured it there. "Now you cannot lift it without effort," he said, "cannot open it on impulse. The knots will slow you, give you time to remember." To choose, Pandora stared at the bound jar. It looked smaller somehow, less powerful, yet she could still feel it, still sense the presence inside pressing against the seal. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me," Epimetheus straightened. "I am only delaying the inevitable. Prometheus taught me that much. Fate always unfolds. The question is whether we meet it with eyes open or closed." He returned to the table, gathered the remaining bread and cheese. "Put them away. You should sleep," he said. "Take the bed. I will sit by the fire. I cannot take your bed. You can." "You will." He pulled a blanket from the chest, wrapped it around his shoulders, settled onto the floor near the hearth. "Tomorrow we will decide what to do. Whether to send you back, whether to marry as Zeus commanded. Whether any of it matters when gods have already decided the outcome." Pandora wanted to argue, could not find words. She stood, walked to the bed, lay down atop the rough wool blanket. The mattress was stuffed with straw. It rustled beneath her weight. The ceiling beams were dark with smoke. She traced their patterns with her eyes, tried not to look toward the corner, toward the jar bound in rope and shadow. But she could feel it anyway. Calling, waiting, patient as stone and certain as sunrise. Sleep would not come easily. She knew this even though she had never slept before. Some knowledge arrived complete, born from the moment of creation. Epimetheus sat with his back to the hearth, silhouetted against firelight, guardian or prisoner. Maybe both, maybe neither. The owl called again from outside. "Closer now." Pandora closed her eyes, listened to the fire crackle, to Epimetheus breathing, to her own heart beating in rhythm with something sealed and waiting in the darkness. Tomorrow she would face the choice. Tomorrow she would understand what the gods intended. Tomorrow would arrive whether she was ready or not. But tonight she would rest, would lie in this small mortal house and pretend that nothing had changed. That fate was not already written, that the jar in the corner held nothing more dangerous than ordinary darkness. The lie tasted sweeter than truth. She held it close. Let it carry her down into something like peace. Morning came with mist, pale and clinging. It pressed against the small window until the light that entered seemed already tired. Pandora woke without understanding. She had slept. One moment darkness. The next, this grey half-light filtering through rough wooden shutters. Her body felt heavy, different, as though gravity had doubled during the night. She lay still, listened to Epimetheus breathing near the hearth. The fire had died to ash. No warmth remained, only the smell of cold stone and spent wood. The jar waited in its corner. She could feel it without looking. The same pull, the same gravitational certainty. But something had changed overnight. The curiosity was sharper now, more insistent, like hunger after fasting, like thirst after long walking under sun. Pandora sat up slowly. The straw mattress whispered beneath her. Epimetheus stirred but did not wake. His face in the dawn light looked younger, less guarded. She wondered how old he was, whether Titans aged differently than mortals, whether any of it mattered when gods built their traps with such precision. She stood, crossed to the window, pushed open the shutters. Outside the world was colorless. Mist covered everything. The olive grove stood gray and ghost-like. Trees emerged from whiteness only to fade back into it. No birds sang, no wind moved. The silence felt deliberate, as though the world itself was holding breath. Pandora pressed her forehead against the cool window frame, tried to remember what she had been before yesterday, before clay became flesh, before wisdom and cunning and that terrible hunger entered her. Nothing came, only the certainty that she had not existed, that she was new, purpose made, built to hold contradictions that would tear apart anyone born naturally. Behind her the jar remained, silent, patient, always patient. You are awake early, she turned. Epimetheus had risen. The blanket hung from his shoulders like a cloak. His hair was mussed, eyes still heavy with sleep. I do not know if it is early, Pandora said. I have nothing to compare it to. It is early. He moved to the hearth, began rebuilding the fire, arranged kindling with careful hands. Dawn came only moments ago. Most mortals sleep longer. I am not most mortals, no. He struck flint against steel. Sparks fell into dry grass. You are not. The grass caught. Small flames grew. He added larger sticks. The fire began to breathe again. Yellow light pushed back the gray. Shadows reformed in familiar corners. Pandora watched him work. His movements were practiced, efficient. The actions of someone who had performed this ritual countless mornings. Building fire, holding back cold, creating small warmth in a world that cared nothing for comfort. How long have you lived here? She asked. 20 years. Perhaps 30. Time moves strangely when you live alone. He stood, brushed ash from his hands. After Prometheus was taken, after the punishment began, I could not remain in the cities, could not watch mortals suffer for my brother's gift. They suffer? Some. Epimetheus crossed to the shelves, withdrew a clay jar. Not the jar, just ordinary storage. He poured water into a wooden cup, drank. Fire brought many gifts. Light, warmth, the ability to shape metal. But it also brought envy, conflict, the knowledge that some have more than others. Prometheus saw only the benefits. I see the cost. He offered the cup to Pandora. She took it, drank. The water was cold, clean. It tasted of stone and minerals. She remembered the bread from last night. How solid things entering her body became part of her. How strange that seemed. How necessary. Zeus punished him for the gift, she said. Zeus punished him for defiance, Epimetheus corrected. The fire was excuse. The real crime was acting without permission, deciding mortal fate without divine approval. Gods do not forgive that. They cannot. If one titan can defy the order, others might follow. Chaos would return. Is chaos so terrible? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. I remember it. Before Zeus, before Olympus, when titans ruled and nothing was certain, when Kronos ate his children and Ouranos cast his sons into darkness. Chaos is not freedom. It is only another kind of prison. Pandora set down the cup, returned to the window. The mist was lifting, slowly, reluctantly. Trees emerged more clearly. She could see the path now, the one that led away from this cottage, away from the jar and its terrible patience. We could leave, she said, not looking at him, both of us. Take nothing. Walk until we find some place the gods do not watch. There is no such place. Then walk anyway. Keep walking. Never stop long enough for fate to catch us, Pandora. I know. She turned, met his eyes. I know it is impossible. That Zeus would send storms. That Hera would whisper to mortals where we hid. That every road leads back to this moment. This choice. This jar, she gestured toward the corner. The jar sat bound in hemp rope, knotted and secured, looking smaller in daylight. Almost harmless. Almost. It grows stronger, she said quietly. The pull. Last night it was distant, manageable. This morning it is closer. Louder. As though whatever is sealed inside knows I am here, knows I am listening. Epimetheus said nothing. Watched her with those careful eyes, reading something in her face, some truth she had not spoken. How long? He asked finally. I do not know. Days, perhaps, or hours. She stopped, drew breath. It depends on how strong resistance can be when gods have built you to fail. The fire crackled. Outside, a bird called, single note, testing whether the world was safe for song. Epimetheus crossed to the table, sat on the wooden bench. It creaked under his weight. The same sound as last night, familiar now, almost comforting. Then we prepare, he said. We do not run. We do not pretend fate can be avoided. We simply choose how we meet it, with clarity, with intention, with whatever small defiance remains available. What does that mean? It means we speak honestly about what you are, about what I am, about what the gods intend and why they built this trap so carefully. He gestured to the bench opposite. Sit. Let us at least understand the mechanism before it closes. Pandora moved to the table. Sat. The bench held her weight without complaint. Between them, the wooden surface bore marks of long use. Cuts from knives, stains from spilled wine, rings from cups set down carelessly over years. Zeus wants me to open it, she said. That is obvious. He could have kept the jar on Olympus, could have destroyed it, could have done anything except send it here with me. He wants mortals to suffer, wants them punished for accepting Prometheus's gift. Yes, Epimetheus nodded. But there is more. Zeus is not simply cruel. He is political. Everything he does serves multiple purposes. Punishing mortals satisfies his wounded pride. But sending you, creating you, that serves something else. What? Control. The word fell heavy, certain. Before you existed, mortals were simple, limited. They had fire, had tools, but they were still fundamentally innocent, children playing with stolen gifts. Zeus could not punish them directly without appearing petty, could not take back fire without admitting he had lost control. He leaned forward, elbows on scarred wood. But if suffering comes from a mortal source, from human curiosity, from your choice rather than his decree, then he remains blameless. The order is preserved. Mortals learn their place. And Zeus still looks like the merciful father who tried to protect them from themselves. Pandora felt something cold settle in her chest, heavier than clay, denser than flesh. "I am not just punishment," she said slowly. "I am excuse, yes, and you." "I am witness," Epimetheus smiled without warmth. "The brother who warned, who tried to stop it. Who will survive to tell the story Zeus once told, that mortals brought ruin on themselves? That divine justice is always deserved." The bird outside called again. Closer now, answered by another, then another, the world waking slowly into sound. Pandora looked toward the corner. The jar sat patient, inevitable, waiting with the certainty of sunrise and the weight of orchestrated fate. "Then we have no choice," she whispered. "We have one." Epimetheus reached across the table, took her hand. His grip was warm. "Steady. We choose to understand, to see clearly what is done to us and why. To refuse the blindness gods prefer in their instruments, will that change anything? No," he held her gaze. "But it will be ours." They sat in silence for a time, his hands still covering hers, the table between them holding their shared weight. Outside the cottage, the world continued its slow emergence from mist. Sunlight began filtering through olive branches, weak at first, then stronger, casting patterns across the dirt floor. Pandora felt the warmth of his palm, the slight roughness of calluses earned through mortal work. He was not divine, not fashioned by Hephaestus or blessed by Athena. He had simply lived, years accumulating like dust, experience settling into flesh and bone. "Tell me about Prometheus," she said finally. Epimetheus withdrew his hand, leaned back against the wall. Something shifted in his expression, not quite pain, not quite pride, something between memory and grief. "My brother sees further than most," he said, "always has. Even as children, he would watch clouds and predict storms 3 days before they arrived, would study animal tracks and know which herds would flourish, which would fail. Forethought was not just his name. It was his nature." He paused, rubbed his eyes with thumb and forefinger. Zeus feared that vision, feared anyone who could see past the present moment into possibilities not yet born. So when Prometheus brought fire to mortals, gave them knowledge and tools and the capacity to shape their own futures, Zeus saw it as theft, as rebellion, as threat. "The chained god," Pandora whispered. "Yes." "Bound to stone in the Caucasus Mountains. An eagle comes each dawn. Tears open his side, devours his liver. By nightfall, the organ grows back. At sunrise, the eagle returns. Again and again. Forever." The fire in the hearth popped, a log splitting under heat, sparks drifting upward like small doomed stars. "That is what defiance costs," Epimetheus continued. "What clarity purchases. My brother knew the price before he paid it. Knew Zeus would retaliate. Knew the punishment would be eternal and inventive and utterly without mercy. He chose it anyway. Why? Because someone had to. Because mortals deserve better than cold nights and raw meat and lives lived in ignorance of their own potential. Because watching suffering without acting is its own kind of chain. Pandora considered this, turned it over in her mind like a stone worn smooth by water. The jar in the corner seemed to pulse. a heartbeat just beneath hearing, insistent and patient and utterly certain of itself. "He warned you about me," she said. "He warned me about everything, about Zeus plotting revenge, about divine gifts bearing hidden costs, about beautiful things arriving at doorsteps with impossible timing." Epimetheus met her eyes. "He told me to refuse, to send away anything that came from Olympus, to trust nothing offered by gods who smile while sharpening knives. But you did not listen. No, the word simple, undefended. I looked at you standing in afternoon light, holding that cursed jar, speaking words you had been taught without understanding their weight. And I thought—" He stopped, started again. "I thought perhaps this once forethought was wrong, that not everything beautiful is trap, that sometimes gifts arrive without poison. You were mistaken, I know." The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, just present, heavy with accumulated truth and the weight of choices made and choices still approaching. The bench beneath Pandora creaked as she shifted, wood remembering form, accepting burden. "Tell me about afterthought," she said quietly. Epimetheus laughed. "Brief and without humor. What is there to tell? My brother sees what will be. I see only what has already happened. I am the one who understands consequences after bodies are counted, who grasps meaning when it is too late to matter, who watches patterns emerge from wreckage and thinks, yes, of course, how obvious it was all along. That sounds painful. It is clarifying." He stood, walked to the window, looked out at olive trees now fully visible in morning light. "Prometheus suffers knowing what comes. I suffer knowing what might have been prevented. Between us we bracket time, future and past, leaving the present as narrow margin where action is possible and nothing is certain." Pandora joined him at the window, stood close enough to feel warmth from his shoulder. Outside, the path led away through trees, disappearing around a bend, going somewhere, anywhere, nowhere that mattered. "What happens after?" she asked. "After what? After I open it. After whatever is sealed inside escapes. After suffering spreads through the world like oil poured on water." "What happens to us?" Epimetheus was quiet. "Watch the path. Trees. The empty space between things." "I do not know," he said finally. "Perhaps we continue. Perhaps we do not. Perhaps the story needs us only for this moment, this choice. And afterward we become footnotes, names remembered dimly in connection with disaster. That is bleak, that is honest." A breeze stirred the olive branches. First wind since dawn, carrying scents of earth and grass and something else. Something distant, like salt water or approaching rain or the breath of gods who watch from high places and feel nothing resembling mercy. Pandora turned from the window, faced the cottage interior, the rough walls, the scarred table, the hearth with its small persistent fire, and in the corner bound in rope and inevitability, the jar. "I want to know you," she said, not looking at him. "Before, while there is still time for knowing anything except regret, you already know me. I know your name, your brother, your role in divine theater. I know you are kind and cautious and prone to accepting gifts that should be refused." She turned, met his eyes. "I do not know what makes you laugh, what you dream about, what small ordinary things bring you joy when gods are not orchestrating your destruction." Epimetheus studied her. Something shifting behind his careful expression, some door opening slightly, admitting light. "I like rain," he said finally. "Not storms, just steady rain falling on roof tiles. The sound it makes, constant and clean and asking nothing. What else? Bread fresh from ovens, wood smoke at dusk, the way dogs sleep with one ear listening, olive oil on rough bread, wine that tastes of hillsides and summer and time." He smiled. small and genuine. I dream about oceans, though I have never seen one. About ships sailing to places that exist only in stories. About lives lived without prophecy or punishment, or gods leaning down from clouds to move mortals like game pieces. Pandora felt something loosen in her chest. Not the weight. That remained. But something else. Some small space opening where breath could enter and hope might briefly rest before being required to leave. I do not know what I dream, she said quietly. I sleep and there is nothing. No images, no stories. Just darkness and then waking. As though the gods who made me forgot to include that particular grace, or feared what you might dream, perhaps, the sun climbed higher. Light strengthening. Filling the cottage with golden warmth that pushed shadows into corners where they waited. Patient, knowing their time would return. Epimetheus crossed back to the table, poured water into the wooden cup, drank deeply, set it down on scarred wood where 100 other cups had rested before. We should eat something, he said. Bread at least. Cheese, if any remains. Mortals require fuel. Even mortals walking toward their designated roles in cosmic punishment. You make jokes, I make bread. He pulled a cloth-wrapped bundle from a wooden shelf. The jokes are free, despite everything. Despite the jar and its pull, and the certainty settling around them like fog. Pandora smiled. They ate bread together, shared cheese crumbling slightly with age, drank water from the same cup. Small, ordinary actions, domestic and simple and utterly unconcerned with divine intention. The jar in the corner waited. It had time. It had forever. And somewhere in the distance, on mountains where eagles circled and gods sat on thrones built from marble and cruelty, Zeus watched and smiled, the meal finished, crumbs scattered across the scarred table. The wooden cup empty now, resting on its side where Epimetheus had placed it. Rolling slightly, coming to rest against a groove worn smooth by years of similar cups. Similar meals, similar moments of quiet before whatever came next. Pandora brushed crumbs from her lap, watched them fall to the dirt floor. Disappear into shadow and dust, small things vanishing, absorbed into earth that would outblast them all. Tell me about the world, she said. Epimetheus looked up from where he sat, hands folded on the table, fingers interlaced, patient as stone. What part of it? The parts beyond this cottage, beyond these olive trees and this path that leads nowhere I have seen. Tell me what exists when gods are not watching, when mortals simply live. He considered this, gazed distant, seeing something she could not. There are cities, he began, places where humans gather in numbers too large to count, where they build houses of mud, brick, and stone, where markets fill with voices and the smell of bread baking and fish drying in the sun, where children run through narrow streets and dogs follow, hoping for scraps, and women carry water jars on their shoulders from wells that taste of iron and time. His voice softened, took on the texture of memory. Or perhaps of longing for memories he had never made. There are fields stretching to horizons, barley and wheat moving like water under wind, farmers walking behind oxen, plows cutting dark earth, turning soil, releasing smells of growth and rot and seasons preparing to change. Have you seen these things? Some. Not enough. I have walked through villages, stood at edges of cities, watched from distances that felt safe. I am Titan blood, even diluted by kindness and poor decisions. Mortals sense it. The difference. They offer wine and step back. Smile and keep their children close. They fear you. They are wise to. Pandora rose from the table, crossed to the window again. Sunlight fell across her face, warm and insistent. The olive trees outside swayed, branches moving in rhythm with breeze, with breath, with the pulse of the world continuing regardless of those who inhabited it. I want to see those places, she said, the cities and fields, the markets and wells. I want to walk among people who were not made by gods, who do not carry purpose like stones around their necks. You will, Epimetheus joined her, stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. After, when this is finished, when the jar is opened and its contents released, when the world shifts on its axis and suffering becomes the common inheritance, you will walk through all of it. See everything. Experience the full weight of what has been set in motion. That sounds like punishment. That sounds like living. Outside the wind picked up. Stronger now, carrying dust and leaf fragments, carrying voices from distances too far to measure, whispers of things yet to come, echoes of choices not yet made, but already decided. Pandora felt the pull again, stronger than before. The jar calling. Not with words, not with promises, simply existing, drawing her attention the way flames draw moths, the way cliffs draw those who stand too close to edges and wonder what falling might feel like. But this time something else rose within her. Not resistance, not refusal. Something different, something that felt almost like understanding. It was made for this moment, she said, not a question. A realization forming slowly, taking shape like clay under patient hands. Yes, the jar, the rope binding it. This cottage, this morning. You and I standing here sharing bread and small truths, all of it designed, orchestrated. A play performed for an audience of one who sits on Olympus and finds mortal suffering entertaining, yes. Then my opening it. My approaching the jar and loosening the rope and lifting the lid. That too is designed. Part of the pattern. Expected. Required even. Epimetheus turned to face her, his expression careful, controlled. But beneath it something else moved. Something that might have been hope or fear or the thin line between them. What are you thinking? Pandora smiled. Small and strange. The expression sitting oddly on features made for beauty, but not necessarily for thought. I am thinking that Zeus expects me to resist, to struggle against the pull, to fight the compulsion for hours or days or however long it takes before I finally surrender. He expects drama, anguish, the slow, painful crumbling of will and I will not give him that. She moved away from the window, crossed the cottage in 3 steps, stood before the jar, rope-bound and waiting, patient as death, as inevitable as morning following night, following morning again. If this moment was designed, she said quietly, if I am merely clay-shaped for divine purpose, if my opening this jar is predetermined and my resistance meaningless, then I choose to do it now, not because I cannot help myself, not because the pull became too strong to resist, but because I understand what I am, what I was made for, and I claim the action as my own. Epimetheus crossed to her, placed one hand on her shoulder, gentle, grounding. You are certain? I am nothing resembling certain, but I am finished being a piece in someone else's game, even if the game continues. Even if my defiance changes nothing. She knelt before the jar, dirt floor hard beneath her knees, the rope rough under her fingers. She could feel it now, the pulse beneath the clay, eager, something alive and ancient and utterly without mercy, waiting on the other side of sealed darkness. Will you stay with me? She asked, not looking back, eyes fixed on the knots, the binding, the last barrier between sealed and open, between before and after. Always, Epimetheus knelt beside her, close enough that their arms touched, close enough that she could feel his breath, steady despite everything, despite knowing what came next, despite prophecy and punishment and the absolute certainty of gods who won regardless of mortal choice. Pandora's fingers found the first knot, worked at it. The rope resisted, then loosened, fell away. Light seemed to intensify. Sunlight through the window growing brighter, sharper, as though the world itself leaned closer to watch. Second knot. Easier than the first, unraveling under her touch. Rope coiling on the dirt floor like a snake remembering how to be dead. Third knot. Final one. The rope fell completely away. Nothing remained but the jar itself. Clay surface smooth and cold. The lid resting loosely now, waiting only for hands to lift it, for will to complete what design had begun. Pandora placed both hands on the lid, felt Epimetheus beside her, his presence solid, real. The only thing in this moment not orchestrated by gods who cared nothing for the creatures, they moved through stories like stars across night skies. Together then, she said, together his hands covered hers. Warm and calloused and human in ways that mattered more than divinity ever could. They lifted. The lid rose, and from the darkness within, something ascended, not rushing, not exploding outward in dramatic fury, simply rising, unfolding, taking shape in the sunlit air of a cottage where two people knelt and held each other against whatever came next. Pandora watched it emerge, watched it take form, watched it become real and terrible and undeniable, and she thought, this is what I am. This is what I have always been, the vessel through which suffering enters the world, the hand that opens the door, the choice that was never a choice at all, but mine nonetheless, mine to make, mine to own, mine. The first thing that emerged was not visible, not at first. It moved through the air like breath across still water, a ripple, a disturbance, something felt rather than seen. The sunlight dimmed slightly, not darkening, but dulling, as though a veil had been drawn across the morning. Pandora remained kneeling, hands still resting on the lid, now separated from the jar, resting uselessly in her lap. She could feel it moving past her, around her, through the cottage air thick with dust and morning light and the smell of old wood and olive oil. Epimetheus did not move. His hand remained on her shoulder. Wow! Steady, anchoring. The second thing came more quickly. This one had form. Shadow and substance twisted together. It moved like smoke, but held shape. Almost human, almost recognizable. It drifted through the open doorway without touching the frame, dissolved into the strengthening wind beyond. Then more, rising from the jar's darkness in steady succession. Not flooding, quote, not rushing, simply emerging, one after another. Patient as seasons, inevitable as tide. Some were shapes, others merely feelings that took space in the air, made the room seem smaller, made breathing difficult, made the simple act of existing feel suddenly complicated, weighted. Pandora watched them go. She did not count. Could not have if she tried. They moved too strangely, blurred at edges, shifted between solid and vapor, between presence and absence. Disease passed through. She recognized it somehow, the way it moved. Deliberate, hungry, already searching for flesh to inhabit, for blood to corrupt, for bodies that would welcome it unknowingly through simple acts. Breathing, churching, living. Famine followed, thinner than the others. Stretched and pale, it moved toward the window, paused there briefly, as though surveying the olive trees and distant fields beyond, measuring, calculating. Then it too dissolved into wind and morning light. War came next. This one different, heavier. It carried weight that the others lacked. It did not float or drift. It walked, Heavy footfalls that made no sound but somehow shook the cottage foundation, left marks in the dirt floor that faded almost immediately. But not quite. Madness spiraled rather than walked, circular, erratic. It bumped against walls, spun through empty air, found the wooden cup lying on its side and circled it 7 times before continuing through the door. Its presence left echoes, whispers in corners, sounds that might have been laughter or weeping or something caught between. Betrayal moved slowly. Carefully, it studied everything. The table, the crumbs scattered across its surface, the empty cup, Pandora and Epimetheus kneeling together. It lingered on them longest, seemed to measure the space between their bodies, the point where his hand touched her shoulder, the way their breathing had synchronized without either noticing. Then it too departed, satisfied perhaps, or simply patient, knowing its time would come. Knowing it always did, others followed. Too many to name, too varied to catalogue. Each carried its own particular darkness, its own specific way of entering the world and making home in human hearts that had not known such things before. Envy, spite, greed, despair. Each one a facet of suffering, each one a method of breaking what had been whole. The cottage grew colder as they passed, not winter cold. Something else, the absence of warmth rather than the presence of ice. As though heat itself had become uncertain, forgotten how to radiate properly. Pandora's breath came visible now, small clouds forming and dissolving. She watched them rise, watched them fade, watched another shadow thing pass through them and continue toward the open door and the world beyond. Epimetheus shifted beside her, not pulling away, simply adjusting position. His hand remained on her shoulder, but his other hand now rested on the dirt floor, palm flat, fingers spread, as though trying to hold something steady that had already begun to tilt. "How many?" Pandora asked, her voice strange in the changed air, smaller than before, less certain. "I do not know. Will they ever stop?" Eventually, the word hung there. Eventually, which could mean moments or hours or lifetimes, which promised ending without specifying when. More emerged. More passed through. More dissolved into the world that waited outside cottage walls. Into wind and sunlight and the spaces between human heartbeats where doubt and fear could take root and grow. Pandora felt something shift within herself. Not guilt, not yet. That would come later perhaps. After understanding settled, after the full weight of what she had done became comprehensible. This was different. This was recognition of pattern, of cycle, of inevitability dressed as choice. She thought of Zeus on his throne, watching perhaps, seeing the jar opened and its contents released, satisfied at prophecy fulfilled, at design executed, at clay figure performing exactly as sculpted to perform. She thought of Prometheus bound to his rock, eagles tearing at immortal flesh that regrew only to be torn again. Punishment for stealing fire, for giving humanity something it was not meant to have. And now this, her own theft, her own gift. Though these things spreading through the world could hardly be called gifts by any measure that mattered, the flow began to thin, fewer shapes emerging, longer pauses between each release, the darkness within the jar growing shallower, less dense, light beginning to penetrate depths that had held nothing but shadow since clay was first fired and lid first sealed. Pandora leaned forward, looked down into the jar's interior. The opening seemed smaller now, less threatening. Just an empty vessel, just clay and air and morning light falling through. But not quite empty. Something remained at the bottom. Small, faint, almost invisible in the dimness. But there, definitely there. She reached for it. hand entering the jar, fingers stretching toward whatever this final thing was, this last remnant, this thing the gods had placed at the bottom beneath all the suffering and shadow. Her fingers touched it, felt warmth. Unexpected, gentle. She drew it out, cupped in her palm. So small it seemed almost nothing. A flicker. A spark. Barely enough to name. But it was something. Chua. The poets would speak of this moment later, would craft elaborate verses about how hope remained when all else had fled. How humanity was left one small light against the gathering darkness. They would make it beautiful, meaningful, divine mercy disguised as accident. But Pandora, kneeling in the cottage with this small, warm thing resting in her palm, understood differently. Hope was not mercy. It was the cruelest gift of all. Because now humanity would endure, would continue, would survive disease and famine and war and every other torment that had just been released into the world. Would survive because this small spark whispered that tomorrow might be better. That suffering might end. That meaning could be found in pain. Hope ensured the story continued. The cycle repeated. The game played on. She closed her fingers around it, felt it pulse against her skin. Alive. Persistent. Epimetheus watched her, his expression unreadable. His hand still resting on her shoulder, warm despite the cold that had settled through the cottage. "What will you do with it?" he asked quietly. Pandora looked down at her closed fist, at the small light seeping between her fingers, soft. "Kitty." "I do not know," she said. "Keep it. Release it. Hide it away again. All seem equally futile. Equally necessary." She opened her hand. "Let the small spark rise." It floated upward slowly, drifted toward the open door, hesitated briefly at the threshold, then continued. Out into the world that had just been fundamentally changed, into wind and sunlight and the space between human breaths where doubt and fear had already begun their work. Hope followed them, small, stubborn, refusing to be extinguished. And, Pandora thought, this is what remains. This is what I have left behind. Suffering and the refusal to surrender to it. Darkness and one small light that will not go out. The jar lay empty now, purpose fulfilled, design completed. Outside, the world continued. Olive trees swayed, wind moved through grass and stone. Somewhere in the distance, smoke rose from cook fires. Life proceeding as it always had, as it always would, but different now. Forever changed by one open jar, one woman's hands. One choice that was never really choice at all. Pandora stood slowly, legs stiff from kneeling. She looked at Epimetheus. He rose beside her, still close, still steady. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we walk," he said, "as I promised. Through cities and fields, through the world we have changed." Together she nodded, took his offered hand. They moved toward the door, stepped through. Into sunlight that seemed dimmer than before, into wind that carried new weight. Behind them, the cottage stood empty. The jar remained on the dirt floor. Open, hollow, a vessel that had served its purpose. Just like her, they walked in silence along the road that led away from the cottage. Their feet stirred dust that rose and settled without sound. The path stretched before them, winding between low stone walls where wild herbs grew in tangled profusion. Behind them, the cottage grew smaller. A shape among shapes, already half forgotten. The sunlight felt different on Pandora's skin, thinner somehow, as though something essential had been filtered from it. She could see clearly enough. The olive groves in the distance, the mountains beyond them. The sky overhead still bright and cloudless, but the quality had changed. A subtle alteration, like viewing the world through water that was almost, but not quite, transparent. Epimetheus walked beside her, his hand warm in hers. He did not speak, did not offer comfort or explanation, simply remained present, a steady weight in the shifting strangeness of the altered morning. They passed through a meadow where sheep grazed. The animals lifted their heads as Pandora and Epimetheus approached, watched with dark eyes, then returned to their grazing as though nothing had changed, as though the air itself had not been remade. But it had. Pandora could feel it with every breath. The world was no longer what it had been when she first opened her eyes in Hephaestus's workshop. That world had been new, untested, full of possibility that had not yet divided into blessing and curse. This world knew suffering now, carried it in every shadow, every breath of wind. The knowledge moved through fields and forests, seeped into rivers and wells, touched every living thing that drew breath beneath the sky. She wondered how long before humans noticed, before they woke to find themselves diminished, fragile in ways they had not been fragile before, subject to ailments and hungers and fears that had no names yet but would learn them soon enough. The gods would watch from Olympus, Zeus with his satisfied expression, Hera with her knowing smile, Athena calculating the implications, Ares already planning how war might be exploited, Aphrodite measuring how despair might deepen desire. They had always watched humanity, always studied, but now they had something to study. Not perfection reflecting their own image, but struggle, change, the grinding friction of existence against limitation. Perhaps that was what they wanted. Entertainment, drama. The satisfaction of seeing creatures made in their likeness finally reduced to proper scale, no longer challenging the divine order through their unblemished contentment, but broken enough to know their place. The road began to slope downward, toward the valley where smoke rose from human settlements, villages where people still slept peacefully, still dreamed without nightmares, still woke expecting nothing worse than the day's honest labor. One last morning of innocence, one final dawn before the world taught them what suffering meant. Pandora felt the weight of that knowledge pressing against her ribs. She had been the instrument, the mechanism, the point where divine will became manifest change, and she would carry that forever. Not as punishment exactly, but as identity, as the defining truth around which everything else would arrange itself. "They will blame you," Epimetheus said quietly, his first words since leaving the cottage. "Yes," Pandora replied. "I know. It will not matter that you had no choice, that the design was laid before you were shaped from clay. They will see only the open jar. The consequences, I understand." They walked further. The valley spread before them, green and gold in the morning light, beautiful despite everything, perhaps because of it. "The poets will write of this," Epimetheus continued. "They will make stories, warnings, lessons about curiosity and disobedience and the dangers of feminine weakness." Pandora smiled. Small, bitter. "Let them," she said. "Let them craft whatever tales serve their purposes. The truth is stranger than any story they could invent." "What truth?" "That I am not the villain of this narrative, nor the hero. I am simply the place where it happened, the vessel through which inevitability poured." She looked at him, his face patient, glistening. "Zeus shaped this outcome before Hephaestus shaped me," she said. "Prometheus stole fire, and humanity had to be punished, had to be reduced, made manageable. And I was the method chosen, beautiful enough to be accepted, curious enough to fulfill my function, clay enough to be molded precisely as required." "You speak as though you had no will at all." "I had will," Pandora said. "But will operates within boundaries. I could choose to open the jar or not open it. but the choosing itself was shaped by forces I could neither see nor resist. Curiosity placed in me by Hermes, desire by Aphrodite, understanding by Athena. Each gift a thread in the weaving, each thread drawing me toward the same inevitable moment, the road leveled. They entered the outskirts of the first village. Simple houses, gardens, a well at the center where water reflected morning sky. Everything peaceful, ordinary, unaware. Pandora wondered what would arrive first. Famine? Famine? War? Or would the subtler torments come initially? Envy spreading through communities, spite souring friendships, doubly, greed turning neighbors into rivals, perhaps all at once. A comprehensive unmaking. She thought of hope following behind. That small, persistent spark, the cruelest gift because it would keep humanity striving, dreaming, believing tomorrow might be different, better, worth surviving toward. Without hope, humans might simply surrender, lie down beneath the weight of suffering and cease. But hope whispered lies about meaning and purpose and the possibility of change, kept them struggling forward through every hardship the open jar had released. Zeus had been clever, diabolically so, to place hope at the jar's bottom, ensuring not just punishment, but perpetual punishment. Not just suffering, but the motivation to endure suffering endlessly. The cycle would continue, generation after generation, each born into a world poisoned by the gifts of gods who claimed to love their creations while systematically destroying them. And Pandora would be remembered as the destroyer, the foolish woman who could not control her curiosity. The warning tale mothers would tell daughters, the example used to justify restrictions and controls, and the careful limiting of feminine power. "Let them blame me," she said aloud. "Let them shape their stories however they need. I know what I am, what I was made to be." "And that knowledge is enough," Epimetheus squeezed her hand gently. They walked through the village, past houses, past the well, past gardens where vegetables grew in neat rows, everything still innocent, still whole. On the far side, the road continued, leading to other villages, other valleys. The whole wide world spread before them, all of it changed now, all of it carrying what she had released. Pandora looked back once, saw the village behind them, the mountains beyond, the sky overhead with its filtered sunlight. Then she turned forward, toward whatever came next, toward the endless walking Epimetheus had promised. Through cities and fields, through the world they had changed together, though she had changed it more, much more. The road stretched ahead, long, winding, without visible end. She walked it anyway, because that was all that remained, carrying the knowledge of what she had done, what she had been made to do. The jar empty behind her, the world full ahead, and somewhere, barely visible, that small spark of hope, following, always following, never quite extinguishing, cruel beyond measure, necessary beyond question. The gift that ensured the story would never end. They walked for hours, perhaps days. Time had lost its usual shape since the jar had opened. The sun moved across the sky, but its passage felt neither swift nor slow, simply inevitable. Other travelers appeared on the road, a merchant with a cart of pottery, a shepherd driving goats toward summer pasture, a woman carrying water jugs balanced on her shoulders, each passed with a nod or a quiet greeting. None seemed to notice anything different, not yet. But Pandora could see it beginning. The merchant's eyes held a new wariness. The shepherd walked with shoulders slightly hunched as though anticipating some unnamed blow. The water carrier's smile did not quite reach her eyes. Small changes, barely visible, but present. The suffering had not announced itself with trumpets or fire. It had simply begun seeping into the fabric of existence, quiet, patient, thorough. They stopped at midday beside a stream. The water ran clear over smooth stones. Epimetheus knelt to drink, cupped his hands and brought the coolness to his lips. Pandora watched, but did not drink. She was not certain she deserved water, clean or otherwise. "You must eat," Epimetheus said. "Rest. The walking will not end, I know. Then preserve your strength." He offered her bread from his pack. She took it, chewed without tasting, swallowed because the body required fuel regardless of guilt. Around them, the afternoon settled into stillness. Birds called from nearby trees. Insects hummed through the tall grass. Everything continuing as it always had, as though nothing fundamental had shifted. But it had. She knew it had. "Do you think they suffer yet?" she asked. "In the villages we passed?" Epimetheus did not answer immediately. He looked at the stream, at the trees, at the sky with its thin sunlight. "Yes," he said finally. "Not the great sufferings." "Not yet." "But the small ones, the ones that accumulate. A headache that will not fade, an argument over nothing, a suspicion where trust once lived." "These are already taking root," Pandora nodded. She had expected this. "And it will grow, yes." "Until the world is unrecognizable, perhaps," Epimetheus said. "Or perhaps the world will seem exactly as it always was, and humans will forget there was ever a time before suffering. They will think this is simply the nature of existence, pain, loss, struggle. They will build philosophies around it, religions, stories to explain why the gods made life so difficult, never knowing it was a punishment, never knowing they sat in silence." The stream continued its endless conversation with stone. Time passed, or did not pass. Both seemed equally true. Eventually they rose and walked again. The road climbed now, up through foothills where pine forests grew thick and the air carried the scent of resin. In the shadows between trees, something moved, not animals. Not exactly. The spirits of what had been released. Pandora could see them if she looked carefully, shapes without clear form. Darkness that was not quite shadow. They drifted through the forest parallel to the road, following, or perhaps leading. She could not tell which. "Do you see them?" she asked. "Yes. What are they doing, searching?" Epimetheus said. "For the places they will settle, the hearts they will inhabit. Suffering requires hosts. It cannot exist in abstract. It must find flesh, blood, minds that can comprehend what they are feeling." Pandora shivered though the day was warm. They passed a shrine beside the road, small, weathered, dedicated to Hermes by the look of the carved symbols. Someone had left offerings, fruit, flowers, a small cup of wine. The wine had turned. The flowers were wilting. The fruit showed signs of rot, nothing dramatic. Just entropy accelerated, the natural decay of all things happening slightly faster than it should. "Even the gods will feel this," Pandora said. "What I released, the gods are immortal, but not immune. Olympus will change. Relationships will sour. Jealousies will intensify. The small cruelties Zeus shows Hera will magnify. The rivalries between siblings will sharpen. Even the blessed suffer. Just differently." Epimetheus looked at her with something like surprise. "You have thought about this. I think of little else." They walked on. The forest thinned. The road crested a ridge, and before them spread another valley, larger than the first. A river cut through its center. Fields stretched in geometric patterns. Villages clustered at crossroads and river bends. All of it still functioning, still innocent, still experiencing its final hours of the world as it had been. "We could warn them," Pandora said suddenly. Epimetheus stopped walking. "Warn them of what?" "That change is coming." that suffering approaches, that they should prepare, store supplies, strengthen their defenses, make peace with neighbors before spite makes it impossible. And what would that accomplish? Perhaps nothing, but perhaps something. Perhaps knowledge would help, would soften what arrives. Epimetheus turned to face her fully. His eyes were sad, ancient, despite his relatively few years. "You cannot warn them," he said, "because there is no defense against what you released. No wall keeps out envy. No weapon defeats despair. These things live inside. They are already there. Waiting, your warning would only add fear to their burden. Another suffering, another weight. So we simply walk, we simply walk." Pandora felt something break inside her chest. Small, final. The last fragment of hope that she could somehow undo what she had done. That redemption was possible. That the story could be rewritten. It could not. The jar was empty. The world was full. And she was the hinge between those two states. The moment of transformation. The breath between what was and what would be. Forever. "Come," Epimetheus said gently. "The road continues." She followed because there was nothing else to do. They descended into the valley as afternoon light began its slow fade toward evening. The shadows grew longer. The air cooler. The world preparing for night. And in that preparation, Pandora felt the cycle complete, not ended. Completed. The difference was crucial. The sun would set, would rise, would set again, endlessly. And each day, humans would wake to the world she had changed, would struggle against suffering she had released, would hope for relief that would never fully arrive. Generation after generation, century after century, the pattern repeating, the cycle turning. She understood now what Zeus had truly created. Not punishment alone, but a mechanism, a perpetual motion machine of suffering and hope, each feeding the other, each ensuring the other's continuation. Diabolical, perfect, eternal. And she was its vessel, its catalyst, its forever scapegoat. The road wound downward. The valley spread before them. Somewhere behind, barely visible, that small, persistent spark. Hope following, always following. Never letting the story end. The first village they entered was small. Perhaps 24 houses clustered around a well. A temple to Demeter stood at the center, its columns white, its altar bearing grain offerings from the recent harvest. Children played in the square, their voices high and bright. But Pandora noticed how the adults watched them, not with joy, with something closer to fear, as if seeing them for the first time, realizing how fragile they were, how easily lost. A woman drew water from the well, her movements mechanical, efficient. But her face held no expression, empty of everything except exhaustion that had not been there yesterday. Envy had found this village, and grief, and the particular heaviness that comes from seeing clearly what cannot be changed. "They do not know what happened," Epimetheus said quietly. "They only know that something shifted, that the world feels different, heavier. They will spend their lives searching for the moment it changed, never finding it, because the moment was not theirs to find. It belonged to Pandora, to the jar, to the curiosity that could not be resisted." They passed through without stopping. The children's voices faded behind them. The road continued, always continued. By evening they reached a larger settlement, more substantial. Houses built of stone rather than wood, a market square, an inn with smoke rising from its chimney. People moved through the streets with purpose. Merchants closing shops, families gathering for meals. The ordinary rhythm of life. But the rhythm had changed. subtly, imperceptibly to those living within it, but clear to Pandora, who knew what to look for. Men argued in doorways over matters that yesterday would have been laughed away. Women clutched possessions more tightly. Children fought over toys with genuine anger rather than play. The seeds planted, already taking root. "We could stay here tonight," Epimetheus suggested. "There is an inn." "Beds?" Pandora looked at him, saw the weariness in his face. He had walked beside her without complaint, without judgment, bearing witness to what she had done and what it meant. "Would that be wise?" she asked. "Bringing what follows us into a place where people sleep. What follows you is already here," he said. "In every village, every home, every heart. You did not carry it. You released it." There is a difference, she supposed there was, though the difference felt academic. They took a room at the inn. Small, clean. 2 narrow beds separated by a window that looked out on darkening hills. The innkeeper was polite but distant. His wife brought bread and cheese and watered wine. Neither smiled. Pandora sat by the window after they left. The room felt close, confining. She could see the spark of hope through the glass. Still present, still following, a small light against gathering darkness. "It never comes closer," she observed. Hope. It maintains the same distance. Always visible, always out of reach. That is its nature. Epimetheus lay on his bed, hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. Hope does not eliminate suffering. It survives alongside it. Just far enough away to seem possible. Just close enough to remain visible. A cruel design or a merciful one. Depending on perspective, Pandora did not answer. She watched the spark, watched darkness deepen around it, felt the weight of what she understood settling into her bones. Zeus had not created punishment. He had created balance. A system that would perpetuate itself without intervention. Suffering would drive humans to hope. Hope would sustain them through suffering, each enabling the other. Neither ever triumphant, and she was the mechanism that set it in motion. The first cause, the original sin, the woman whose curiosity changed everything. She thought of Hephaestus in his forge, shaping her from clay and fire, giving her form, beauty, the capacity for thought and feeling. Had he known what she would become, what role she would play in this eternal machinery? She thought of Athena breathing life into cold clay, making her animate, conscious. Had the goddess of wisdom understood that consciousness would demand answers, would seek, would open what should remain closed? She thought of Aphrodite granting her grace and desire, Hermes giving her speech and cunning, all the gods contributing their gifts, building her piece by piece for one purpose, to be the hinge between ages, the dividing line, the before and after. They had made her perfectly for this task, and she had fulfilled it exactly as designed. The realization should have brought comfort. It was not truly her fault. She was merely following her nature, doing what she was created to do. But it brought no comfort, only deeper understanding. She was both victim and perpetrator, tool and agent. Her choices were her own, even if they were also inevitable. She slept poorly, dreams fractured and strange. She saw the jar opening again and again, each time she tried to stop herself. Each time her hands moved forward regardless, lifting the lid, releasing the darkness. In the dreams, the spirits that emerged had faces. Her face, endlessly multiplied. Countless versions of herself pouring into the world, each carrying a different suffering, each wearing her expression of horror and recognition. She woke before dawn. Epimetheus still slept, his breathing steady and deep. She dressed quietly and stepped outside. The village was silent. Not the silence of peace. The silence of held breath, of waiting. She walked through empty streets to the edge of town where the road continued north. The spark was there. Constant, patient, hope keeping its eternal distance. "Why do you follow?" she asked it, not expecting answer. "What purpose does this serve?" The spark flickered. Or perhaps that was only wind and tired eyes. She stood there until light began to touch the eastern sky. Rose and gold spreading across hills that had seen countless dawns and would see countless more. The world continuing its ancient pattern. Sunrise, sunset, seasons turning, generations rising and falling, and through all of it, the cycle she had initiated. Suffering and hope. Hope and suffering. Neither ending, neither beginning. Just continuing. Eternal. Epimetheus found her there as full light arrived. "The road calls," he said simply. Yes. They walked, north through lands that were changing even as they passed through them. The suffering spreading, finding homes in hearts that had been innocent, transforming the world one moment at a time. And behind them, neither gaining nor losing ground, that small persistent spark, following, always following, making the story possible, making the suffering bearable, making the cycle complete, the mechanism Zeus designed, running perfectly, forever. They walked until the sun stood high. The road beneath their feet was ancient, worn smooth by countless travelers who had passed this way before suffering became their companion, before hope became their shadow. The land began to change, not in dramatic fashion. No mountains rising, no rivers cutting new paths, but in small ways. A field left untended, a fence broken and unrepaired, a farmhouse with smoke rising thin and uncertain from its chimney. Signs of a world learning to live with what it had been given. By midday, they reached a crossroads. 4 paths meeting in a dusty clearing marked by a single olive tree, old and gnarled, its branches spreading wide despite the weight of years. Pandora stopped there. Looked down each road in turn, east toward distant mountains, west toward the sea she could not see but somehow felt, south the way they had come, north the way they were going, all the same, all different, all leading somewhere that mattered and nowhere that mattered in equal measure. "We could choose any direction," she said. "The result would be identical." Epimetheus touched the olive tree's trunk, his palm flat against ancient bark. "Yes." "Then why continue north?" "Because the road we travel must be traveled." The direction matters less than the movement, she understood. It was not about destination. It had never been about destination. The walking itself was the point. The bearing of weight. The continuation despite knowledge. They rested in the olive tree's shade, shared the last of their bread, drank water from a clay jar Epimetheus had filled that morning. The taste was clean, pure, untouched by what swam in the air around them. Hope kept its distance beyond the crossroads, waiting, patient as stone. "Do you think it tires?" Pandora asked. Hope. Does it grow weary of following? Hope does not tire. It simply persists, like us, yes, like us. They rose as afternoon shadows began to stretch, chose the northern road without discussion. Their feet knew the path even if their minds questioned it. The land opened before them, rolling hills covered in wild grass. Here and there a shepherd moved among his flock, small figures against vast sky. Lonely in a way they had not been before, a loneliness that came from knowing others now suffered in different ways, in incompatible ways, ways that made comfort difficult and understanding rare. They passed through a third village as evening approached, smaller than the others. just a handful of houses clustered around a well. The people there moved slowly, carefully, as if testing each action before committing to it. An old woman sat by the well, spinning wool on a hand spindle, the thread thin and even despite her age. She watched them approach without expression. "Travelers," she said, "not a question." "Yes, going where? North?" The old woman nodded, continued spinning. The spindle turning, thread forming from formless cloud of wool. Order from disorder, pattern from chaos. "You have the look of those who carry burdens," she observed. Pandora said nothing. "We all carry burdens now," Epimetheus replied, "some heavier than others." "True enough." The old woman's hands never stopped moving. "My daughter weeps at night. My son argues with his wife. The children fight over toys they once shared freely. Things have changed. They have. Will they change back? No." The old woman accepted this. Her face showed neither surprise nor despair, only the calm of one who has lived long enough to recognize truth when it arrives. "Then we adapt," she said, "as we always have." "As we always will." She returned her attention to her spinning, dismissing them without rudeness. Simply acknowledging their presence was complete. They moved on. The village fell behind, the road ahead empty and darkening. The sun touched the western horizon, spilling copper light across the world. Everything it touched. Pandora walked in silence, thinking of the old woman, her steady hands, her acceptance of what could not be changed, her determination to continue anyway. Perhaps that was the true nature of humanity, not the suffering, not the hope, but the space between them. The daily choice to persist despite knowledge, to build despite inevitability, to love despite loss. They made camp beside the road. No shelter nearby, no village lights visible in the gathering darkness. Just open sky and rolling land, and the wind moving through grass like breath through lungs. Epimetheus built a small fire, fed it carefully. The flames caught and held, pushing back darkness in their immediate circle while leaving the greater night untouched. Pandora sat close to the warmth, watched sparks rise toward stars, watched them fade before reaching the heights they sought. Small lights briefly visible, then gone, leaving no trace of their passage. "I have been thinking," she said finally. About the old woman. Yes, she was not angry, not broken. She simply accepted and continued. That is what humans will learn to do. Accept and continue. Because the alternative is surrender. And humanity does not surrender easily, even to gods, especially to gods. The fire crackled, settled. Hope spark visible beyond the circle of firelight. Constant, eternal. "Do you think we will ever stop walking?" Pandora asked. Epimetheus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "No. I think we will walk until we cannot walk, and then we will rest. And then we will walk again. Because we are part of the cycle now. We set it in motion and it carries us forward forever, until the world forgets us, until the story becomes myth, becomes legend, becomes nothing. Then perhaps we will stop." But Pandora knew they would not stop even then, could not stop. They were bound to this, to the road, to the following spark, to the endless continuation of what they had begun. She lay down beside the fire, looked up at stars scattered across darkness. Ancient light traveling impossible distances to reach eyes that could perceive it. Messengers from the past arriving in an eternal present. And so the legend fades into starlight, not ending, not concluding, simply continuing in the vast space between earth and heaven where stories live on regardless of whether anyone remembers them fully. Pandora closed her eyes, felt the road beneath her, felt the weight of understanding, felt the small, persistent presence of hope keeping its eternal distance. Tomorrow they would walk again, north through changing lands. And the day after. And the day after that. Walking until walking became its own purpose, its own meaning. The cycle complete, the mechanism running. The world transformed and transforming still. The fire burned low. The stars wheeled overhead, and in the darkness beyond the light hope waited. Patient, faithful, eternal, following them as they would follow the road, as humanity would follow hope, as suffering would follow humanity.